Welcome back to this episode of the Law of Relevancy podcast. Today we're joined by Greg Brooks, who is one of the preeminent thought leaders when it comes to search engine optimization anywhere. And with everything that's changing in the world of SEO, we invited Greg on the show to hear what are the most elite SEO agencies out there doing to keep up with all the rapid changes. Greg, welcome to the show.
Hey, what's up, Coach? Thanks so much for having me on. Yeah, there's a lot going on right now to keep up with everything. It's really interesting.
I made my first website in 1996, and I remember SEO really wasn't a thing back then. I mean, there was Alta Vista, there was a few of the others that were popular search engines, and there was this new thing called Google that was starting to show up. And I just remember it was pretty obvious and it was common sense that there was going to be this thing where you needed to make sure that your website showed up on the first page or showed up in these quote unquote search engines back then. And it has changed 1,000 times since then, it seems like.
Yeah, everything has been evolving. I think a really fun, popular website would be all the times that Google has been declared dead, and that it's over, never again. But how people seek information fundamentally evolves as we get more comfortable with the internet, as more technology emerges, and I think that's really what search or SEO is really all about in today and leading into the next bunch of years. It's how do people seek information online, and how do we as brands, companies, individuals intersect with that?
Yeah, and I think fundamentally it's really one thing. Like when you look at all the changes, I mean, sometimes they tell you there's like multiple algorithm releases in the same day or whatnot when you're paying attention to tools like SEMrush. But at the end of the day, Google has always been successful because they were the most relevant. They were always trying to figure out, like, what is it that people are looking for, and let's make sure we provide them quality results. And they just seem to do that better than anyone else. And they did it fast. So faster and better, and it boom. Now they've got practically a monopoly. I think technically they just were declared a monopoly, but anyhow, it seems like that is the fundamental thing. But now we're coming in this new era where these large language models are becoming an important way that people are doing research and looking for things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest shifts that has occurred and will continue to occur in the future is what people look for where and how they're discovering, and how that impacts how a brand or a company should basically put focus in. And so whether good or bad, at the beginning of Google's kind of like dominance, we collectively as publishers and content creators were incentivized to essentially create online encyclopedias. We were told to write about a topic or to speak about a topic, and to do so in the deepest capacity possible, in the most thorough capacity possible, and to report information. And so that created an entire search result, essentially, of answers to questions based off of quote factual, quote third party, whatever information. And that's really what the search results turned into in the old era. And now what you have is you basically have LLMs come around. And in terms of that version, in terms of the online encyclopedia, in terms of the aggregator of information, LLMs are just going to be built to do that more effectively than someone in specific, a user doing a search and going through their own journey to kind of get to that decision point. So it is a really interesting evolution, and where people go for where they search for information at their own point in the customer journey, depending on what demographic they are.
And I think you're getting a level deeper with the customer journey conversation, but and we'll definitely go there. I think that it's also important to note that early strategy of building the encyclopedia for, as your website, I think that one of the things that these LLMs are doing that savvy marketers immediately picked up on was their ability to write some of that encyclopedia-esque type content. But it seems like it hasn't been exactly a slam dunk. There's been releases that come out that are trying to identify artificial intelligence created content. How are you guys seeing some of that impact your customers in the marketplace or other people?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we were pretty early in declaring that we didn't see any issues or negative outcomes from having AI generated content. I don't think that Google's ever cared about that, and I don't think they'll ever care about it in the future. What Google has always cared about is essentially results. So when you get to the top of the search engine, it's all about experience. It's all about, did you click on a result and did you bounce back to the search result pages in 10 seconds? Because you probably didn't get the answer if you were. Or did you go to that page and then you kind of just went on your journey after that, implying that you did have your answer, in that actual search result. So the incentive for an individual has always been to build to get into that area, but now I think the incentive is shifting and it's away from being just about information, which is going to become a commodity. We're going to get ChatGPT, whether it's 10.0 or 15.0, where you can click a button and you can create actually good content from scratch. The real question from a strategic perspective is, how do I excel in an era where 99.9% of the content on the internet, whether written or video, is AI generated?
Well, I think you bring up an important point because some of the releases years ago started talking about multimodal content. If you have pages that include video, that include imagery, that include text, all of those things together built more confidence within the crawlers. Are you guys seeing that as still an effective strategy?
Conceptually, yes, just because it's still a ranking factor. So we've crawled tens of millions of pages of Google, and we've seen, okay, if we add up all the different traits and characteristics that pages have, how does Google rank them? What are the different ranking factors that Google has? And so everything that you just named is absolutely going to be examples of things that anything will look at, including LLMs, to determine the predictability of what they're reading. In terms of, hey, is this something that we're super focused on with our clients? What we're more focused on with our clients is, I would say, two or three things. Number one is bringing in your own expertise and experience into what you're writing about or speaking about. And the second thing, just in terms of like structure, we call it page scrollability. That's, can you go through a page on your phone? Can you scroll, and can you pick up on the different sections such that if something caught your eye, you'd be able to stop and read it and go into more detail and then scroll, keep doing your thing. So those are really two focal points that we have currently that we think it's better to know where conceptually to put more effort towards.
Well, this is the second time now that you've mentioned really the engagement on the page, and it really doesn't matter how you get there.
Yeah, I think that it's true on one hand, and on the other hand, you still need to factor in what's actually happening. So we would one thing that we tell our clients is, if you have a query or you have a question that you're answering or a topic, what should your first sentence be? It should be the answer to the question, the answer to the query. Your next few sentences should be a little bit more context to that answer. Maybe there's exceptions or exclusions or whatever it is. The rest of what you're writing about is actually the focal point of all of the context, all of the unasked questions that someone who's learning about a topic needs to know, but they don't know that they need to ask them, all of the different variations and ways that you talk about something to provide education. And when you kind of put all that stuff together, that's now what a good piece of content is. And it takes into consideration what we call value per word or value per second. So the other side of it is, don't waste people's time. If you're able to talk about something in 15 seconds that takes someone else 2 minutes to say, do the 15-second things. Now, the irony is that you actually need to be an expert to be able to distill down information about a topic to what's most important and what's not.
Right. No, I really love that strategy. When you talk about working with your clients, if people look at the type of companies that you guys work with, you'll see some big enterprise clients on there. What do those engagements look like in terms of how do you actually plan? Because in many times those sites may have tens of thousands of pages. So how do you actually work with a large enterprise client like that to come up with an effective strategy? And then also like how you're going to prioritize the work?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the big difference between working with larger companies and working with smaller companies is the importance of understanding what's possible. So, at a larger company, you have more departments. You have marketing. You don't just have search. You have acquisition. You have product. You have design, UX, and everybody kind of has their own. You might have editorial teams. Everyone's kind of got their own divisions and ownership of a given website. So your first thing is understanding what is actually physically able to get done. And then your next piece is kind of like who's actually running the show. And most companies, it's product or it's IT slash dev who's really running the show, and understanding how things get worked into their roadmap and understanding what sort of internal selling needs to take place to make sure that your priorities are going to be evaluated and then able to be worked into the roadmap. So at that point, you know how you need to frame your opportunities, you know how you need to think about things like impact and effort. And only then do you have a framework for how to create a strategy. So all that stuff that I talked about has nothing to do with search. It has nothing to do with SEO. It's all about understanding how things get done at larger organizations. And then once you only understand that, then you can start putting together, okay, so here is what is the best kind of like payoff of what we can do, which has the likelihood to be able to be sold into, which can get into the roadmap this quarter, et cetera, which is also why a lot of what we do is link building, because that exists outside of a website. That's just something that we can handle, entirely ourselves.
Yeah, that's really good information because and I love to talk about this with our team and with others about how there's this technical side of what we do, but there's also this soft side. And the soft side is at least 50% of the equation. You
Right.
can have all the answers, you can have all the strategies and the ability to write code and the ability to do the graphics or whatever. But if you can't effectively communicate with your customer or execute or set expectations properly, you're going nowhere.
Yeah, for us, we split everything into three different groupings. The first group is kind of everything that I just talked about. It's understanding prioritization and how things work behind the curtain. Then the second is the actual strategy. So that's, am I coming up with the right things to be focusing on? And is the strategy good? Do we actually have the ability to say, this is the problem, this is the problem, this is the solution, this is the solution? And then the entire third piece is what we call implementation, which is, okay, we've presented these things. How can we be supportive in making sure that they actually get implemented? And the irony is, I think a lot of agencies or service providers kind of think that their job ends once there's kind of like this presentation or a document gets sent over. But I think that's a pretty bad way to look at it, because at the end of the day, you're asked whether or not you get the result. And nobody really cares if you come back and say, well, so and so said this wasn't possible, so it's their fault. I don't think that's an accurate way of how things are actually working.
Yeah, that's not a great way to make friends with that client
Yeah,
either.
yeah.
The it's interesting. I want to ask a couple more questions about working with some of these very large clients because a lot of times you mentioned the word like who's running the show, who has control. And many times if it's kind of skews towards more the IT department, you're going to get a lot more security. You may not, as an SEO provider, even get the ability to touch a website. You just have to create briefs and provide instructions to your counterparts marketing team on what they're supposed to be doing and hold them accountable and things like that. Or potentially you might get access to blocks of text or whatnot. And I would assume an agency like yours might even be able to manipulate some of that copy or at least work it through some kind of a workflow for approval. What do you see most often, the type of engagement? Do you guys have more of a hands-on or are you really doing more advising and accountability?
Oh, I don't know the last time we've ever touched a client website. Like, I think it's been a very, very long time. We don't want to. That's not, I also don't think that we work with companies that want us to because of what you're saying. But what we do want to do is we still want to provide the level of detail that would be required if we were actually making the changes to the website. So let's say that we're optimizing a piece of content. We literally want to say, this word changed to this word. This paragraph says this, make it say this instead. Down
Right.
here, add this H2, do this. So we want to provide the instruction manual and make it as easy as possible. And I think that's important to do. And then on the dev side of it, it's like, hey, we need to do this thing. And sometimes there's just a plugin ability to, not a physical plugin. Sometimes there's an easy, straightforward way to do that. Sometimes there's, hey, we can't do this because of X. And then we're getting back and we're having collaborations on, okay, well, what's the next best thing that we can do? Or is this the one that we really need to just like put our foot down and say, hey, everybody, we're just not going to get the results that you're looking for without this thing, which you can do, but obviously it adds a lot of pressure. So I think that it comes down to 90 something percent of the effort that you can put focus on, you shouldn't be, because there's just a handful of things that if you nail them and you just keep iterating on them, they're going to generate the majority of your results. And really, it's just about making sure that happens. So we can put more time and effort into internal sales because we're not like, well, here's a list of 7,500 things. We're like, here's the 3 things. When we do our audits, usually 3 things. Here's the 3 things. And if you fix these things, you've done the majority of the effort. And if you haven't, we shouldn't have a conversation about any of these other things.
Yeah, I think you said a key word there, audit. You know, when somebody has a large organization, big website, that is, in my opinion, the best way to even start. When you're you've chosen your SEO partner, the next step is like, let's do that audit and let's build that plan.
Yeah, and I think typically that's in an ideal scenario. What is typically happening is, here's the part of the website that we can get stuff done in the next 6 months on. Here's a part of the website that 3 pages on this, we can do this and this too. And otherwise, pretend that it's not even available because nothing's ever going to be changed on there. Here's the technology stack that we're using. And so something that we see a lot is like people are using pre-rendering. Anything that has to do with rendering. We were saying it for years. We were like, no, this doesn't work. And Google was saying, yeah, this totally is okay. We can render it. And we're just like, no, that's not true. And then I think Google came out like a year and a half ago and said, oh, we actually can't. So rendering and JavaScript, those are really the 2 biggest issues that we see from a technical side. But the problem with that is typically you're using a rendering solution. Typically you're using a JavaScript script that's running across every single major page of your site. So the real key when you're planning out what you want to do is you need the short-term wins and you need to be ruthless in getting those, and they need to get the core results. So they need to generate more revenue, or they need to generate more traffic in a meaningful way if that's what's being tracked, because it needs to give your team that you're working with or the people you're working with at that company the confidence in you to go to bat internally for something that you're recommending, which then will have the bigger, longer term impact. And that's kind of like the game that you wind up playing.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. You've got to arm your client with the tools that they need to go get you more wins. I mean, for a fact that they want to look good, and the way that they look good is by their recommendation performing. So those quick wins are really good. One of the things that is kind of paradoxical in my mind is that, when you look at a really large website and you're like, man, how am I going to get improvement on this thing? Because it's so big and there's so many different areas, so much that could be done. There's also the fact that a lot of times those very large websites have more authority than a smaller website would have. And so as you go in and make some of these changes, it's actually happening in many times faster than you would, normally get with a smaller website.
Yeah, I think the smaller the website, the less authoritative it is, the more you're going to rely on link building. That's also true for larger websites where there's key pages that someone's never done link building towards, and all the competition, the top results have like a good amount of page authority because of their link building. So way one that we get around that is the more link building we can do that's helpful, the more we control some of these results. And then number two is it's just about, and it's even during the sales process, it's okay, just so that everybody knows here, there's one metric that's going to be responsible for the success of our campaign more than any other metric. And it is the rate of implementation. How quickly we can implement things is going to generate our success. By the way, we don't expect to be correct about everything that we implement. We expect to be correct about, make up a number, 50%, 75%, whatever you feel good about. But you need to set the expectation that things are not going to always just snap and turn into magic results, because especially when other teams get involved, especially when there's effort from a development or engineer department or product, it's usually a pain in the butt to get them to do something. So the fact that they are doing it, they're like, oh, well, this better work. And you're like, no, that's not how it goes. But if you don't set that expectation before, then you typically don't get a second chance.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. I think a lot of people don't really understand how important link building still is. I
Yeah.
remember in the early 2000s, I was working for a direct TV retailer, and we were just a retailer. We happened to be one of the top 10, the largest, but we figured out how to use a black hat strategy to build links. And I'm not suggesting anybody does anything black hat, but back in the day, we had hundreds of thousands of links that we had procured and went to our page, and we were outranking Dish Network and DirecTV for some terms that they should be ranking number one for. And of course, that doesn't last forever, and you can really, really expose yourself doing black hat things. We only do white hat things these days, but really, the point I'm trying to make here is the importance of link building, and it is straightforward. It is also really hard, at times to do that.
Yeah. I think 2/3 of the people on our search team at Search Tides are just focused on link building because it is so one by one by one by one. And in terms of, in the ranking factors that we look at, link building comes in as number one. It is the number one ranking out of everything that you've ever heard in SEO, out of all the different ranking, link building is still number one. That's not true for a local website, which is going to have a different basically ranking algorithm. But for a national website, it's link building. And if you think of Google's algorithm as like this three-pronged piece, you have basically authority, which is a proxy for links. That's one. The second one is going to be like content. Inside of that is on-site optimization. And then the third is going to be technical. And what GPT models just did was make it way more straightforward for people to churn out better content and more content. So if you think about those 3 points, now the bar just got raised really high in this one area, which means that you need to do better just to get the same result that you got previously. Well, where does that leave the other 2 areas? It makes them more important. And technical is a really straightforward thing for a lot of folks in SEO. Like it's what they've been cut on. It's their bread and butter. It's kind of the thing that every SEO knows something about, and how to look at something or how to crawl something. So the real competitive advantage comes from the link building side of things.
Yeah, and just what you just said, it's even more important now because now the content itself is commoditized to some extent.
Yes. And also your own expertise and authority, your own expertise and experience in the content is really the only thing that can really differentiate from that Encyclopedia Britannica listing that we're talking about, or Wikipedia style page of the past that was getting rewarded. So the door on that is getting thinner and thinner as well on the content side of things, because Google, ChatGPT, Perplexity, they are basically becoming more and more top heavy, which means that there's fewer voices. And that means that your voice has to be more and more qualified and able to add value in a way that an aggregator of information cannot.
Well, that's the name of the game. Let me ask you another question. So this is a little bit of a pivot off of our core topic here, but there are other search engines out there that serve the way that people are looking things. The one that comes to mind to me is YouTube.
Right.
How important is it to optimize for channels like YouTube or secondary search engines these days?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we have what we call a social search program, and that's basically, for some businesses it's YouTube, for other businesses it's TikTok. So you might have a demographic that's basically where they go to learn information is on TikTok. No one's going on Google, no one's using ChatGPT. It's straight to TikTok, straight into the search bar. How do I discover things? Same thing could be true for Instagram and the 12 friends who are still on Facebook. So, but it could be Pinterest, whatever it is. So it's really about where's your demographic go and how do they discover information online. And for the overwhelming majority of folks, that's Google. Here's the catch with Google. It's harder than ever to win because you're going up against incumbents who have been around for another year compared to last year, who have more links than before, who put out more content than before. So unless you're close to or you're already generating like meaningful traffic from Google, it's getting more and more difficult to be able to do that. These other sites, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, they offer a pathway where the competition is basically not as challenging. Now, obviously, the volume's not even close to Google, but the trade-off is, as a smaller brand, you have an opportunity to actually win.
Let's get back to that audit just for a second. Is that one of the first things you should look for when you're doing your audit? Obviously, this is a competition, right? So, in that discovery process, I'm imagining that a big part of your audit is, hey, what benchmarks are our competition at? Like, how many links do they have? How many pages? How long that they've... So that way, at least your client understands what they're trying to surmount.
Yeah. And for us, that's even during the sales process. So we want to basically have a plan for you to execute. And the plan is, where's everybody else? How far away are we from everybody else? What's it going to take? Level of effort, time, amount of links, types of, on-site changes that need to be made, pieces of content that need to be created. And then, do you want us to do that or not? Do you want to have a collaboration where we do that? Do you want to say, nope, this doesn't make sense for us as a brand to do, whatever the answer is. But yeah, one of the most telling things, Google and search and SEO has always just been this like weird black magic thing where you're like, yeah, I'm at the top, but I have no idea how or why that's the case, or those other people are, what can we do to catch up to them? And the answer is, if you could show people quantitatively what that is, then all of a sudden they can make an informed decision about whether or not it makes sense for them to go on that journey.
Where do you see search going? How do you think that these LLMs are going to impact the way that people find and discover information as it relates to how we're doing it 2 years ago?
I think that most of the LLM search is going to go back to Google. That's my contrarian prediction, but it's going to come in the form of AI overviews. It's not going to be because Google, people are yearning for those 10 search results. Like, if you think about an OpenAI and a Google, you basically have, or Perplexity or whatever it is. And if you look at these LLMs, what they are is essentially data sets being processed by GPUs or, a computer or whatever. So in order to be competitive, your real only advantage is your data set. That's it. You can process more. Data is oil, blah, 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 whatever you want to call it. So your advantage is data set. What's happening with LLMs right now today? Over 93% of all publishers online are blocking LLMs. Why? Because this way, if they crawl and I'm the New York Times, I get to sue you for $100 million. Or I'm some other company who isn't sure what the sensitive information or PII, or I'm in the medical community or whatever it is, but it's resulting in literally over 90% of all the content on the internet. And it's top heavy. So it's coming from the most important websites, blocking LLMs. Perplexity's kind of got a loophole that they use to get around that. Once they get to a certain size, I'm going to have a funny feeling that won't be around that loophole. When ChatGPT researches the internet to give you, it goes, hold on, let me think and let me look on that. We all know that they're just actually going on Bing. They are on average giving you back the number 14 search result on Bing. And the reason is because everything else is blocked. The flip side of that is Google, which has every website in the world wanting to make sure that it can crawl. So this is giving AI overviews two unique data sets that no one else has. Number one, pretty much the entire internet, which is a huge, huge differentiation. And number two, every non-public video on YouTube. So if you're talking about putting together a model, those are two things that no one else will ever be able to replicate. And you could say, okay, well, maybe there need to be advantages on like how things are processed or the intelligence of how things are processed. But at the end of the day, like until we hit AGI, that's what's actually going to, the data set is what's actually going to denote what happens. So that's a contrary prediction. In terms of how people are searching today and how they will continue to search, I think it just depends on what they're looking for. So for me, I start off this morning, I'm putting together a project plan for a new project that I'm doing, and we have a budget and big goals. And I spent like 30 minutes in ChatGPT putting together a 12-month plan with different budget structures and different goals and outcomes. And how do I go from 0 to 1 on this? And I'll probably go back tomorrow and I'll dive more into it and create something, from that perspective. That is like a massively better alternative to using Google to get best practice information about how to put together a plan for a new initiative or et cetera, et cetera. So that's apples and oranges. What an LLM is doing there is it's really just like fixing a problem that used to exist. It's a problem that I should have to go to Google and query a fact or information that an encyclopedia can just tell me what it is. I want to, Harry Potter it and just do this and have the information come to me. Well, that's exactly what LLMs are. Now, the future is really going to come down to how consumers buy. When I'm at the bottom of the funnel, how do I make my purchase decisions? And I think an indicator of how that might happen is if you think about where Google is right now in terms of percentage of all search. Google last year, before all the LLMs, so 2 years ago, was at 91.65% of all searches in this category. Now they are at about 90.6%. So about 1% less, all the way down from 91.5 to 90.5, in the middle of the biggest Google is dead narrative that's ever existed on the internet. And the facts are the facts are the facts. People are going where they go. And more so, people weren't going where they went. So I wonder if I was on TikTok or Instagram or YouTube, and now I'm starting off on an LLM compared to, massive amount of user base that was searching on Google and still is searching on Google for everything, which I'm not even doing.
Say that last part again. I didn't catch that. What are you not doing?
I'm not searching on Google for everything. I'm going straight to ChatGPT, and everybody who I know is doing something similar, but the data is still the data. So I think that it's just a bunch of people whose job it is to look as far out into the future as what technology will become, and then bring it out to people and talk on shows like this about it and give people competitive advantages. I think the whole reason why that exists is because that is clearly not the average behavior. Ask my mom, who uses MapQuest still.
I mean, I'm just looking over at the producers in the room right here, and I know at least one of them always just goes to TikTok.
Right. Right. Now the real question is, did that behavior change in the last year? And if not, then it's been on TikTok, and before that, maybe that wasn't on Google anyways. Maybe that was on YouTube, and then maybe a bunch of years ago that was on Google, or maybe it was on Instagram before TikTok or something. So I think that's kind of a piece that we might be missing from the equation too. It's like, where are people coming from who are using these technologies today?
Yeah, and you're right. The whole Google is dead. I mean, you're losing 1%, but you are going the opposite direction. So in some ways, it is. I mean, it's obviously not dead, but the fact that we saw a change of direction is pretty significant because it's really only ever grown, except for that one time that Bing spent like $5 billion on advertising like 12 years ago.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Google has basically been losing market share for the last about 10 years. Now, most of the time it was to itself in the form of like YouTube. And then really since social media came up, you've had people who have become native to certain social media platforms. I think the big change and difference maker is now you just have such AI enhanced search bars everywhere on the internet that it's easier for somebody to just stay in the area that they already hang out. And I do agree with you. I think that results in more market share being taken from Google.
Well, speaking of some of these search bars and the way that the LLMs are interpreting it, and some of the just the stuff that we see going on. I mean, we're in the middle of a political election, like a very, very big one.
Mm-hmm.
How important, when it comes to the content, are things that where like there might be some bias within the tool, for example? Like I've seen, you can't even search for certain topics. Like if you search for Trump, you get results for Harris. If you get, I mean, things like that are happening where it feels like there's some manual controls. So like, are there areas of content that you need to avoid?
I think that what we forget in this that gets hyped up about AI is that it can do things that humans can't do, which is true. But it's also made by humans, which means that it's going to be, maybe it's convoluted, but it's going to have that human creation component reflected in it. And you can make an argument that there's a manual override, or this is just a reflection of what already exists. It doesn't matter. It's the same result, which is essentially like, new technology shouldn't be unilaterally and blindly trusted. And it was the same thing, by the way, when television came out. We probably, when radio came out, or when the printing, do you know the guy who made the printing press? I don't remember his name.
Guggenheim?
There you go. Okay. So when Guggenheim made the printing press, I bet everybody believed every word that was on that, simply because it was a new form of technology. And then we realized, wait a second, this Guggenheim guy, not a big like beholder to the truth. And then the same thing probably happened again for radio. And then the same thing happened again for newspaper, which I guess newspaper came first, then radio. Obviously, I haven't been alive for the onset of those technologies. So chronologically, I'm off on some of them. But we do the same thing. The beginning of the internet, I don't know if you remember that, course, but we were just, every word was true until we had this realization that was not the case. Right. And I think we're seeing a version of that happening with AI also. Now, I think that exists separately to what you're talking about, which is like malice or, purposeful bias being put into something, which like maybe it's there, maybe it's not there, but just don't blindly trust technology no matter what you think, if it's malicious or benign or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a big believer of like a healthy paranoia about all of these things, right?
Right.
You should definitely question everything all the time, just to filter it through. Does this make sense? Computer in your head.
Yeah.
All right. Final question. How important is autocomplete and trying to rank for autocomplete in a search engine?
I just skip it at this point. I think that so let me immediately contradict myself and say that wouldn't be the case. If you are a local business and you have a defined market, every single thing that happens that is relevant to you is really, really important because there's just not that many of them.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody's searching from a different geographical location, they're not relevant to you. So immediately, every time someone is searching from something that's relevant to you, it is really important. So a GMB, your reviews, getting links from the local chamber of commerce. If you're a car dealership, getting links from your regional car dealership. If you're a local dealership, those sorts of things become way more important. And if you're going to do like a click-through campaign, or CTR campaign to try to get stuff like the autocomplete, again, that has more significance because it is really important. There's only so many things that can be happening, so everything becomes magnified in terms of its importance.
So it is important sometimes and not important others.
I think that it's more of like a hack or a trick. And so I put that into something that's going to have short-term payoff, which
Right.
is going to be a better idea to do at a local capacity because there's probably going to be more random short-term payoffs that exist at a local level. If you're talking about national, you're probably like, okay, here's my choice. I could try to hack autocomplete to get my thing to come up, or I could focus on a really, thorough link building campaign. You don't have that same decision matrix at the local level. So it makes sense that you would focus on something like that versus nationally. You're like, no, I can have an algorithm update come out that destroys my entire 9-figure revenue generated from this website.
Right.
That's where I should hang out in terms of my focus.
Exactly. And I was going to have another question. I was going to lie and say, okay, here's the last question.
Hit me with it.
But it seems to me like there is, and this kind of goes back to just sort of like the white hat fundamentals, but it seems like if we were to recommend to somebody what percentage of their digital marketing budget they should allocate to SEO, it should definitely be something, and it should definitely be probably at least 20%. I mean, it's like it's a long-term strategy that becomes some of the cheapest traffic you'll ever acquire, and some of the highest quality traffic you'll ever acquire over the years and years that you do it.
Yeah, I think that a couple times where I think that is broadly a good recommendation. I think that there's two separate things that would make that untrue for specific groups. So number one is if you're in a competitive industry, meaning again, non-local, so you're national, and all of your competitors are really far away from you and they're larger than you, and you're not generating wins and you're pretty far away from generating wins, you're going to continue to be pretty far. Like there's probably better budget for you to spend elsewhere, unless you're at the point where you just have all the different channels and then you want to win in every channel. Then it becomes really important. And I think the other thing is time. So you have to prioritize your time for certain businesses. Maybe they're a little bit like smaller marketing teams or whatever it is. And there's only so many hours in the day. If you're using an agency, that's one of the ways to fix that time. If you're just dealing with everything internal, all of a sudden what channel you focus on is a direct, competition to the other channels. So there could just be situations where something is better for you or worse.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I guess the point of asking the question is you've got short-term strategies, you've got long-term strategies. And it seems to me like when I go back in time and think of all the websites and all the people we've ever helped with SEO, that looking back, it seems like it's always worth it to focus on SEO.
Yeah, it tends to be. And I think that we just get blinded by the new shiny objects that come around. But ultimately, the thing that there is one marketing channel where if you nail it, it's just a printing press of free money that can go for years and years. And that's organic search.
Yeah. And with that, where can people follow you and learn more about your leadership when it comes to SEO?
Well, we talk about stuff like this at SearchTides a lot, which is just searchtides.com. You can sign up for our email newsletter. We're on YouTube. We're on LinkedIn at SearchTides. I am on LinkedIn also, Gregory B. Brooks, I think, on LinkedIn. So, yeah, you can shoot me a message there and say, hey.
All right, we'll definitely do that, Greg. I'll make sure to personally follow you after this. And you can find us anywhere where podcasts are found across the Bake More Pies social media channels and the Law of Relevancy. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.